Welcome to How to Fix It. I'm John Avlon, author, journalist, historian, recent congressional candidate, and the purpose of this podcast is to talk about finding solutions to the problems we face, not simply focusing on the problems themselves. And our guest this week is somebody who has embodied that spirit better than anybody in the U.S. Senate, for my money. U.S. Senator Angus King, independent of Maine, caucusing with the Democrats, one of the few two-term independent governors in our nation's history, now bringing his common sense wisdom to Capitol Hill where we desperately need it. Angus, it's good to see you, sir.
John, always a pleasure. Looking forward to a conversation.
Well, we're going to have a good one as always. This week, you gave a landmark speech commemorating the roughly 75th anniversary of Margaret Chase Smith's Declaration of Conscience, which was when that pioneering female Republican senator stood up in the Senate well and denounced her Republican colleague, Joe McCarthy. And you not only commemorated the anniversary, but you drew connections to the challenges we are facing as a nation today, and they are stark. And I want to read one quote from your speech that jumped out at me. This president is engaged in the most direct assault on the Constitution in our history. And we in this body, at least thus far, are inert and therefore complicit. You described this in the speech as willful ignorance. Explain.
Well, here's the problem. And I cited Margaret Chase Smith, and to put a little context around it, John, her great speech called the Declaration of Conscience on June 1st, 1950, was taking McCarthy to task for the techniques and manner in which he was pursuing an anti-communist agenda, slandering people, destroying their reputations, innuendo, and it was very destructive at the time. I got to know Margaret Chase Smith after she left office, and she told me that during that period, it got to the point where you were actually afraid of who you had lunch with in the Senate dining room for fear of being accused of being soft on communism or a fellow traveler. So it took a lot of guts for her to deliver that speech. But what struck me, I went back and read it recently. It could have been written last week. And instead of talking about one of our colleagues who was abusing the Constitution and the privileges of office, we've now got a president of the United States doing it. And I want to emphasize, John, the danger here is not the president's agenda, although I disagree with just about all of it, but that's not really the issue. The issue, just like with Joe McCarthy, is how he's pursuing that agenda, which is essentially by gathering all of our governmental power into his hands, into one set of hands. It's fascinating to me. The president's been in office now for, as we know, 100 days. There have only been 5 bills that he signed. One was the continuing resolution to keep the government open. One was the Lake and Riley Act on immigration. The other 3 were little Congressional Review Act about regulations. In other words, don't amount to much. That's got to be a world record of non-accomplishment. But the other side of that coin is he's done a hell of a lot by himself. He's essentially shut down the AID, USAID. He's essentially effectively shut down the Department of Education, the Voice of America. All of these are created by Congress. And for the president to arbitrarily say, well, I don't like this program, I'm going to shut it down, that's a gross violation of the separation of power. And I want to emphasize again, I'm not coming at this as a senator who's worried about losing his power and that kind of thing. What I'm worried about is when you have all power concentrated in one set of hands, it's dangerous for everybody because world history, 1,000 years of world history tells us when you have concentrated power like that, whether it's called a pharaoh, a king, a dictator, a czar, it's going to be abused. And the people are going to be the victims of that power. So what I'm talking about is not necessarily something about immigration or tax policy or tariffs. It's the danger of the concentration of power into one set of hands, which is exactly what the people that wrote the Constitution wanted to avoid. The whole deal of the Constitution was to separate power because they knew how dangerous it was. I got to give you one Madison quote. You're a historian.
I love a good Madison quote.
47th Federalist, Madison said, the concentration of executive, judicial, and legislative power in one set of hands is the perfect definition of tyranny. He didn't mince words. Tyranny. Later on in the same essay, he said, when you have legislative and executive power in the same set of hands, freedom can't endure. So I'm trying to sound the alarm, John, about getting beyond the daily headlines about tariffs and all the other things that we hear every day to remind people, particularly my Senate colleagues, that something's going on here that's really dangerous, that goes to the heart of our whole constitutional system that's held us in pretty good stead for over 200 years.
And what's the reaction been privately versus publicly?
My Republican colleagues basically don't want to. Here's what I think, and I'm getting informal feedback, but they think this is just, another political dispute. It's the Democrats trying to take down the president and their president, and it's Republicans against Democrats, and you don't like, the immigration policy or whatever. And that's reaction number one. I think they think this is just politics as usual. Maybe Schumer put King up to this speech, which, by the way, is total nonsense. And the second thing is they say, well, there are some problems, but the courts will take care of it. And indeed, the courts are doing a pretty good job of stepping up, but that's a cop-out. It's our job. The oath we take when we stand up there and become senators is to defend the Constitution. And here's a really interesting phrase from a historical point of view: from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think it's very interesting that the framers anticipated domestic enemies of the Constitution. And that's our job. And to say, well, the courts will take care of it. In my speech the other day, I went through this long list and said of what we could do in the Senate. And I said, do our job. So that's the reaction is sort of avoidance, I would say, more than anything. They really don't want to confront the centrality and the importance of this issue. They're hoping it will just sort of go away.
Which is a definitional dereliction of duty. It is a violation of the oath and the framers' construction of the Constitution, as you say. I think what I want to press on you, though, is given that so many of this president's policies are a complete 180, a repudiation of the conservative beliefs that many of your colleagues have espoused for decades, codified in the phrase constitutional conservatism. When they're confronted with that contradiction, whether it's a repudiation of free trade in favor of tariffs, a policy of obsequiousness towards Russia, we could go on and on the list. How do they square that circle?
Well, one of the arguments I get is whataboutism.
Yes.
Well, Biden unconstitutionally tried to forgive student loans. Well, that's like comparing jaywalking to a head-on collision. Presidents always are trying to gather more power to themselves. That's happened. That's been a tension throughout our history. But nothing has ever happened like this, where you have a president who basically is. Well, let me go back to the Constitution for a minute. Article 2. That's the definition of the president's power. And you probably remember in the last Trump administration, at one point the president said, I've got the amazingly powerful Article 2. It gives me power to do anything I want. It doesn't. Just the opposite. The powers given to the president are very, very limited, and almost all of them involve having the consent of Congress, whether it's making treaties or appointing officers or appointing judges. But here's the key phrase, John. It says the principal responsibility of the president is, quote, to see that the laws are faithfully executed. Not to see that the laws he likes are faithfully executed, or the laws he doesn't like he's going to ignore, or that he gets to make law. An executive order, by the way, is not a law, despite what this president seems to think. So and my colleagues say, well, Biden tried to do this, or Obama did this or that or the other thing. It's qualitatively different what's happening today. But again, I think they sort of view this as politics as usual, and it'll blow over, and we're going to have elections in a couple of years. My concern is once you allow a president to take this immense power of the federal government into one set of hands, it's going to be very hard to get it back for the people.
For sure. I mean, he breaks it, they buy it, and you've destroyed the concept of the politics of the golden rule. But let me press you on their logic a little bit further. You say some of them say, look, the courts will take care of it. But we've already seen this administration, this president, have contempt for the courts.
Right.
In one case, literally.
Almost literally, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What is the Senate's recourse to make sure the president is abiding by the laws? The president is abiding by the Constitution.
What has to happen is for 8 or 10 Republicans, and I want to say, I get a lot of emails and calls saying, why don't you fix this? Stop it. I don't have the votes. I mean, it sounds like a cop-out, but that's just the reality. We need 8 or 10 Republicans who are willing to say enough is enough. And for example, as they had an opportunity last night, vote to bring back into the Congress the tariff power where it belongs and where the Constitution puts it, but they didn't do it. But to say enough is enough, for example, we're not going to pass your tax bill until you stop acting unilaterally. This guy's a negotiator, but right now nobody's negotiating with him. And the other thing I want to mention, John, is not only I talked about AID and Department of Education, appropriation bills are law. They're not suggestions. Here's where we think you might want to spend some money. They're law, and they define the expenditures, and they say these are the programs we believe are important, and to freeze funding, to withhold funding, to impound funding is just straight up unconstitutional and illegal, because in 1974, when Nixon tried to do this, the Congress, on a bipartisan basis, passed something called the Impoundment Control Act that said presidents can't do this. If they can, we may as well fold up and go home. I mean, the famous power of the purse has been handed over to the president, and the power essentially to legislate, to decide what the policy should be. He's now attempting to make laws via executive orders, which that's just not the case. I don't know how many executive orders he's issued, over 100. And he's trying to make policy in those things.
Right. This is country over party. This is Constitution over party. And that's what's been abandoned. I want to just press you on the tariff point, though, because this is an issue that has been Republican bedrock principle, and yet the president has a command and control view of the economy, indeed the global economy. He said, I set the price. And Milton Friedman's rolling over in his grave, but you had 3 Republican senators who voted with the Democrats. What was the rationale? Because it's already created havoc in the economy, domestically and globally. It's hurt America. It presumably hurts their short-term self-interest, and it's an abandonment of all their other alleged principles. So what was the rationale they used to go along? Just fear? Greed?
I confronted a couple of my Republican colleagues last night and said, hey, this is a good place where you should be able to depart from the president, because I don't think his followers are necessarily all that excited about tariffs. The response I get was, oh, they're working. We're getting more jobs in our town and our state. I don't really believe that, but that was the response. But I think it was kind of whistling past the graveyard, frankly. But why? Let's talk about the tariff power. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution. Here's, by the way, this is Article 1 of the Constitution on my tie. Can you see "We the People" right there?
I can see "We the People." Love it.
Okay. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 explicitly delegates to the Congress the authority over trade and commerce, trade with foreign nations and commerce. Now, Congress delegated some of that power to any president years ago, only to be used in an emergency, only to be used unilaterally in an emergency. Well, the problem is this fellow defines emergency as whatever he feels like. I live in Maine, on the border of Canada. I can tell you there is no emergency with Canada, and yet he imposed these stringent tariffs. And the same thing with tariffs of, essentially every country in the world. Is there an emergency on the McDonald Islands that's populated only by penguins? What's the emergency there? And the vote last night was simply to bring that power back to Congress where it belongs, And this is a good example, John, of the danger of one-person rule. This is complicated stuff. Tariffs and international trade is very complicated. There are lots of unintended consequences. I've been hearing stories for the last 3 days about businesses drying up because of these tariffs in Maine and in other places. This is something that should be debated and should have a lot of discussion and argument and between reasonable people. It shouldn't be one person.
Now, you took some heat along with many of your Senate colleagues, including Senator Schumer, for not voting to shut down the government. And the argument, as I understand it, was, look, this is just going to empower the destruction of Trump and Musk in the first 100 days even further. It was unpopular on the left, to say the least.
No kidding.
I think perhaps in the fullness of time, while not emotionally satisfying, it seems to have been the wiser course. I wonder if you would explain that vote and the deliberations around it for folks.
For some, I think for many, this was an opportunity to, quote, stand up to Trump, to fight back. And we had members of our caucus, and we certainly had members of our constituents who just wanted us to fight. And I remember a couple of members of the caucus standing up. We had like 4 meetings in a row before that vote saying, we've just got to fight. And we've got to show people that we're going to fight. Well, sometimes you've got to think about, okay, what if we win this fight? What's the result? As King Pyrrhus said a couple of thousand years ago, one more victory like this and we are undone. And my analysis was, and you put it properly, a no vote was a vote for a shutdown that would have started 3 hours later. In the House, they could vote no, and it was kind of a freebie. That'll go to the Senate, and they didn't have to think about, will there be a shutdown in a few hours. When it came to us, it was I believe the day of the shutdown deadline, and so it was a choice. Here, it was a clear choice between a lousy continuing resolution, which had some real problems, or a shutdown, which I believe, and come to believe even more strongly, that Musk and Trump and Russell Vought at OMB wanted. Think about it for a minute. Every person that worked for the federal government, except for the military and certain specialized FAA, would basically be laid off. That's Musk's dream. And all funding would have stopped. All program funding would have stopped. Not Social Security, not those essential services, but all the kinds of things that people are worried about being cut would have been cut in a shutdown. And we didn't see a path out. You have to assume in a shutdown that both sides want to get it over with. I don't think that was a good assumption in this case, where we're dealing, again, this isn't a normal time. We're dealing with people who I think would have welcomed a shutdown. Finally, the final point was any economic problems the country had from then on would have been blamed on the Democrats for shutting down the government. And that wasn't a major consideration, but that's a fact. And I didn't think it was a good idea to hand that argument to the president. But the main thing that concerned me was that a shutdown would have actually had worse impacts on the values that all of my friends wanted us to fight for than the vote to keep it open. And I took a lot of heat for it. I was amazed. I did an Instagram post that night explaining the vote and just got creamed. One of the rules of politics is you shouldn't read the comments, but I do anyway.
One of the rules of life on the internet, yes.
Yeah. But we did the right thing. I don't have any doubt that it was a matter of the least worst choice, John. That's what it came down to.
I want to end on two things. You have a unique perspective on the threats facing our nation. And I wonder just, what are you concerned about, whether you look at the dysfunction in the Pentagon or the threats overseas? What are the important stories that people are not paying as much attention to because they get crowded out by the urgent, the looming threats, if you will?
Well, let me touch on just a couple. Number one is Ukraine. If we walk away from Ukraine, it will be the worst geopolitical decision I could think of for 100 years. It will embolden Putin. It will embolden Xi Jinping. It will embolden Kim Jong-un. It's the opposite of deterrence. Our whole strategy, I'm on armed services and intelligence, our whole strategy of national security is based upon the concept of deterrence. That is, if you do something aggressive, you're going to pay for it. If we just stood by and watched a free and democratic country basically taken over by a neighbor using military force, the first invasion of this kind since World War II, it would haunt us. It would be a horrible thing for this country. Second, related to that is, who's going to trust us? Who's going to trust us to come to their aid? NATO is based on the principle of, all for one and one for all. If there's an attack on one, there's an attack on all, and everybody responds. That's Article 5. Are the countries of Eastern Europe going to believe that we're going to come to their aid under NATO if Putin takes aim at Lithuania or Estonia or Latvia after successfully gobbling up Ukraine? Another concern is countries like Japan and South Korea, who are allies. Are they going to trust us? Right now, they don't have nuclear weapons. They haven't developed them because they're under our umbrella. They trust us to come to their defense in the case of a crisis. What if they say, well, look at what they did in Ukraine. We can't trust America anymore. We're going to have to develop our own nuclear arsenal. And that's dangerous for the world. The more countries that have nuclear weapons, the more dangerous it becomes. The proliferation risk becomes higher. The danger of terrorists getting a hold of nuclear material becomes higher. So Ukraine is a serious test for the credibility of this country. Second concern I have, John, is, and I've learned this in 10 or 12 years on these two national security committees, the greatest asset that we have over our adversaries is allies. China has customers. We have allies. And what's happening, and this is one of the downsides of this foolish tariff regime, is it's alienating our allies. We're poking in the eye of the people that should be our friends that we want to have at our back when there's a dangerous confrontation. And to alienate and cut off our allies it couldn't be more short-sighted, particularly for no good reason.
Are you seeing evidence that there is a reluctance to share information among the Five Eyes and others because of the perception of instability in our government? And more importantly, in the long run, how do we restore faith that America is a dependable ally with this administration in place?
Arbitrary cutting off of our relationship with our allies is really undermining our asymmetrical advantage in terms of national security around the world. It doesn't make sense. I mean, we had virtually full employment on January 20th. I just heard yesterday, as a result of this whole tariff thing, UPS is laying off 20,000 people. I mean, the irony is a policy designed in the president's mind to boost manufacturing and jobs in the U.S. is actually costing jobs in the U.S.
Well, welcome to life in bizarro world. We've been here before. I want to ask you the toughest question, but I want to, this is about solutions, and I want to give people hope. First of all, what is the path to rebuilding trust? What should Democrats faced a tough map? So in the Senate in particular. So what actions do you think Democrats should be taking to be rebuilding trust? And then secondarily, and you can answer these sequentially, where do you find there might be surprising common ground in the Senate that might even be actionable? Some good things that senators agree on that they might be able to get done rather than just tussling over red jerseys versus blue jerseys and fealty to Donald Trump.
Well, you may laugh at this, but just this morning I had a press conference with Steve Daines, Republican senator from Montana, where we're introducing a bill called the America the Beautiful Act to provide ongoing support for the restoration of our national parks. And that's a good example of something where we can work together on a it's not earth shaking, but it's important to the American people. So there are those opportunities. I thought when we came into this session that there was a chance of doing something on immigration and the border, but that's all been blown up now because you can't talk about immigration. It's just such a volatile issue. But I do want to give you a little hope. There are things that are getting done around here that don't get any attention. Smaller things, often on a bipartisan basis, unanimous consent basis, that do have some significance. And I see, for example, some green shoots of people in my Republican colleagues who are ready to maybe step away a little bit from the administration. For example, a major bill was introduced a week or two ago, co-sponsored by Maria Cantwell, Democrat from the state of Washington, and Chuck Grassley from Iowa, Mr. Republican, with 7 Republican, 7 Democrat co-sponsors on bringing the trade power back to Congress. That's a big deal. And last night we came within 1 vote of passing a bill that would have brought the trade power back to Congress, that would have revoked this emergency stuff. We came within 1 vote last night. We got 3 Republican votes, and it ended up being a tie. And Vice President Vance came and broke the tie, which I like I said to my colleagues, this was an opportunity for them to declare their independence, at least on this issue. And the fact that the Grassley-Cantwell bill is out there, that gives me some hope. And I think, I don't know what it's going to take, John. Here's what I think may happen, though. A lot of the depredations of Elon Musk working under the auspices of the White House are just starting to hit home. In other words, are people feeling it in their communities? And when a Social Security check is late, or somebody's calling the VA for an appointment and nobody answers the phone, that's when I think the tide might turn. Because believe it or not, we are responsive to our constituents. And when my colleagues start to hear from home that people don't like what's going on, I think that can and will have a significant impact. But again, to go back to the very beginning of our discussion, we've really got to return to the separation of powers, as clumsy and slow and frustrating as it is. That's exactly what the framers intended, and they intended it for good reason, because that's the principal bulwark of our liberty.
Senator Angus King of Maine, Declaration of Conscience, Declaration of Independence, and an important defense of the U.S. Constitution above all special interests. Thank you very much for joining us on How to Fix It.
Great to be with you, John. Anytime.
Hey, YouTube fam, if you want to support the Bulwark, the best way to do it is by becoming a YouTube Bulwark Plus member. The Bulwark is truly independent. We have no corporate overlords. We're not settling any dumb lawsuits with Trump. By joining, you help support our work, and you can get a bunch of perks right here on this platform. Ad-free content, bonus videos, live streams, and some emojis of me, which I guess some people want. So come join, come hang out, become a Bulwark YouTube Plus member, and I'll be seeing you in the comments. So behave.